Welcome in. Today we're diving deep into a diplomatic showdown, and let me tell you, it's got all the makings of a spy thriller. We're talking accusations of assassination plots, secret deals the works, ready to untangle this web.
Absolutely. It's a complicated story, lots of threads to pull on, but that's what makes it so fascinating, right?
Exactly. We're jumping headfirst into the tension between Canada and India specifically. Canada's accusations that India's government is orchestrating a campaign of violence against Sikh activists. And these activists aren't living in some far-off land. They're right there on Canadian soil. But here's the thing. India is denying everything, calling it all political maneuvering. To really get a grip on this, we got to rewind a bit back to the death of Hardeep Singh Nijjar. This feels like the key to it all. So in 2023, Nijjar, a well-known Sikh activist living in Canada, was killed. Now Canadian authorities are saying they've found evidence, get this, linking his death to Indian government operatives. And it gets wilder. They're even talking about intercepted communications that suggest a larger operation targeting Sikh activists.
This is where it gets really interesting and a little unsettling. See, Nijjar wasn't just any activist. He was a leader in a movement pushing for an independent Sikh state. They call it Khalistan. A movement India has always seen as a threat, a direct challenge to its national unity. This goes way back, decades, often marked by violence, going back to the 1980s even. India sees this movement as a direct attack on its security.
Okay, so there's a lot of history here, some serious baggage.
Yeah.
But how does that connect to what's happening in Canada now?
Well, Canada's saying their investigation uncovered a whole network of Indian agents operating within their borders. They were gathering information on people like Nijjar, that's for sure. But it gets even more serious. The allegations go beyond just watching. Canada suggests India might be using criminal gangs to carry out violence against these activists.
Now, that's a major escalation. And just so we're clear, they're not just making empty accusations. Canada claims to have concrete proof. We're talking intercepted communications, financial record stuff that directly points to these alleged Indian operatives. And it's not just about Nijjar anymore. Canada's bringing up other cases, like the killing of Sukhdev Singh in Winnipeg. Here's the unsettling part. This happened just one day after Singh popped up on a list of gangsters put out by, you guessed it, India. I mean, come on, that timing can't be a coincidence, can it?
That's exactly what Canadian authorities are saying. They're saying this points to a pattern, a deliberate targeting of individuals. It even has a name in international circles, transnational repression. Basically, it's when a government goes after people it sees as enemies, even if they're beyond its borders.
So we've got these incredibly serious accusations coming from Canada. What's India's side of all this?
Oh, we're pushing back, that's for sure. India's flat out denying any involvement, calling Canada's accusations completely baseless and, you guessed it, politically motivated.
So we've got this back and forth, a real he said, she said. But then things get even more intense with this hush-hush meeting in Singapore, right? You mentioned criminal gangs earlier. What's the deal with that? Who are these gangs and how do they fit into all of this?
Right, so in the middle of all this drama, Canadian and Indian officials hold this super secret meeting in Singapore, supposedly to clear the air, find some common ground. Can you imagine being a fly on the wall for that conversation?
Oh, I can only imagine.
Mm-hmm.
The tension in that room.
Yeah.
Give us the insights scoop. What went down?
From what we've heard, Canada came ready to play hardball. They brought what they claim is rock-solid evidence. We're talking intercepted communications, the works, financial transactions, even witness testimonies, all pointing directly at Indian officials in Canada.
Wow.
They laid out their whole case, saying India was running this, as we said, transnational repression campaign right under their noses on Canadian soil.
Okay, so Canada brings the receipts, as they say. What's India's response to all this?
Well, word on the street is that India's national security advisor, Ajit Doval, was there personally. And he basically shut it all down, denied everything.
Real.
He allegedly said, yeah, okay, India uses its diplomats to keep tabs on people.
Mm-hmm.
Snapping some photos, that kind of thing. But he insisted it was totally standard procedure, just keeping an eye on things, nothing to see here, definitely not connected to any threats or violence.
So India admits to some level of surveillance, but draws a hard line at violence. But what about Canada's claim that India was using these specific criminal organizations, actual gangs, to carry out these attacks? They even named a name, Lawrence Bishnoi, right?
Exactly. Canada says they have proof tying India to this criminal organization run by Bishnoi. Now get this, Bishnoi himself is actually behind bars right now in India.
Okay.
But Canada claims his gang has a big presence in Canada involved in all kinds of shady stuff, including, you guessed it, violence.
So let's say hypothetically there's some truth to Canada's claims.
Yeah.
Why would India take such a huge risk? What's the end game here?
You got to remember India's history with the Sikh separatist movement to understand their side. It's been a sore spot for decades, a really sensitive issue. They see people like Nijar as serious threats, potential terrorists even, to their national security.
So are they saying India felt like they had to take matters into their own hands, even if it meant crossing some serious international lines?
Some experts are saying exactly that. India has a long history of dealing harshly with anything they see as a threat, especially internal threats. And this situation might be a sign that they're ready to flex their muscles on a global scale, even if it ruffles some feathers along the way.
But that's playing with fire, isn't it? If another country could actually prove that India was behind violence within their borders, the fallout would be huge.
Absolutely. We're talking a massive breach of international law, a total breakdown of diplomatic norms, and that's why this whole situation is so sensitive. Canada is basically accusing India of state-sponsored terrorism on their home turf. That's not something you just brush under the rug.
This whole situation feels like a ticking time bomb. Where do we even go from here? What happens if Canada can prove its accusations?
It's a question that keeps a lot of diplomats up at night, and it goes way beyond just Canada and India. This whole thing has really shaken up the international community. People are worried about what this means for India's tactics, how far they're willing to go. It sets a scary precedent.
It's interesting. Canada's saying they actually warned India about all of this multiple times, going back years. So if that's true and nothing really changed, it seems like this blow-up was only a matter of time.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head there. This wasn't some isolated incident. There was obviously something brewing beneath the surface for a while.
Both sides have already taken some pretty drastic steps, kicking out diplomats. But what's next? What other options are on the table? Could things escalate even further?
It's definitely possible. Some experts think Canada might hit India with sanctions, targeting specific people or organizations linked to these operations. They could even take legal action, maybe even issue some arrest warrants.
But wouldn't that almost guarantee some kind of retaliation from India? I mean, we're talking about two major global players here.
Exactly. And that's what makes this whole thing so nerve-wracking. Any escalation could have massive consequences, diplomatically, economically, you name it. It could even affect security cooperation between the two countries, which would be a huge deal.
It's easy to get caught up in the politics of it all, but we can't forget about the human side of this. The Sikh community caught in the middle of this diplomatic tug of war. They must be feeling incredibly on edge right now.
Absolutely. Sikh communities in both Canada and India are glued to the news right now, and there's a lot of anxiety, a lot of fear. It's understandable. Many are calling for everyone to just take a breath, de-escalate the situation, but it's hard to say what will happen.
This deep dive has been a wild ride, to say the least. We started with what seemed like a local murder investigation and ended up in a full-blown international incident, accusations of state-sponsored violence. It's like something straight out of a spy novel.
It really shows you the reality of international relations, how messy it can be. You have these national security concerns clashing with international rules, and nothing is ever black and white.
One thing's for sure. This story is far from over. The whole world's watching to see what happens next in this standoff between Canada and India. And as always, we'll be here to break it all down as the situation develops. What are your final thoughts on this whole thing?
This case really makes you think about how far a country will go to protect its interests, even if it means operating in the shadows. It raises so many questions about accountability, the use of force, and that delicate balance of power on the world stage. This one will stick with me, and I'm sure our listeners are feeling it too.
It definitely will. It's a stark reminder that even in our interconnected world, seeking justice and maintaining peace is a constant battle. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been eye-opening, to say the least.